All right, welcome back to another episode of Travel Ball Talk. I'm your host, Rich Prado, owner of Plain School. Today we're heading down to one of the best vacation spots in the country, Hilton Head, South Carolina. Our tour guide today is going to be prime owner-founder Shane Monahan. Shane, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm excited. We're going to bring along a crew and go down to Hilton Head and find out what the baseball scene down there in one of the top spots to hit the beach and to go play golf is. So hoping you can accommodate me and a few dozen listeners. So tell me real quick, man, before we hit record, you and I have crossed paths. You spent a little bit of time up here in Virginia. Can you take us back to your time in Virginia? What were you doing? Who were you with during that short season of your life?
Sure. So was in Alexandria, Virginia for a little bit. Hooked up with a former big leaguer, Mike Colangelo. We had run through each other, knew each other in college, played against each other, played each other in the minor leagues and the big leagues. And he had the Stars program and needed a 16U coach and kind of roped me back into it. I had actually left Atlanta, Georgia. Got out.
We're gonna get there.
Circuit.
Oh, we're gonna get there because you're dropping names like crazy. For those who are maybe newer to this podcast, we had Colangelo on the podcast. Oh gosh, several years ago at this point. If you're not from this region, the Stars are a mainstay in the D.C. metro, Northern Virginia area. But you can check out my conversation with Mike at playinschool.com/Colangelo, spelled exactly like you think it's spelled. So the reason I asked you about that is like, show up to a town, don't know anybody, want to get back into baseball. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call around. And there's somebody out there who wants somebody who is excited to coach kids. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it is, right? So, he had started a program and built that program. And, he had Sean Camp, who's broken away and now, coaching college. So former big leaguer there too. And, we kind of got back in touch and he just said, hey, come check it out. And, I was kind of like, man, I don't want to get back into travel baseball. And then, the more I kind of thought about it, I was like, I do miss baseball. So I kind of just laid out my terms to him and he was like, let's go, let's do this. And I was like,
yeah,
okay. Like,
cool.
if you're cool with it, let's roll. So, yeah, it was good. It was
cool.
Really good.
Cool. Yeah, man. Mark Wright, Carson Carroll, Glenn Caroline, they got a bunch of good dudes, and like you said, Sean Camp, who's the now the head coach up at George Mason. They're always a perennial power up here in sort of my neck of the woods. But let's go back a little farther. You don't have to take us all the way back to T-ball, but like I was checking out your quick bio. You played in the ACC, had some time at Clemson. Pretty good coaching staff back then. What was that all about? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I explained to everybody. I'm a hockey player that played baseball. I grew up in a hockey family with a great grandfather in the Hockey Hall of Fame, a grandfather in the Hockey Hall of Fame, a dad that played in the NHL for 10 years, and I grew up in the South. So when hockey left to Calgary, I was left with football and baseball. And lucky for me, had an amazing high school coach at Wheeler High School, who's a legend in Georgia, Coach Dave McDonald, and was recruited by Jack Leggett at Clemson when he was an assistant coach. And I'll be honest with you, had no idea who Clemson was, except for Florida State ran a fake punt on a kick one year, and I was a huge Florida State fan, and I was being recruited heavy by a ton of schools in the South, and Georgia was where I really wanted to go, and watch Clemson destroy Georgia in baseball one night, midweek game. And Coach Leggett had called me down and just said, hey, what do you think? And I was kind of like, didn't you recruit me at Western Carolina like a year ago? And he was like, yeah, I moved over to Clemson and took this job. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of awesome. And A couple weeks later, was on campus, and from there committed. So the first staff I played under was, Coach Bill Wilhelm. Coach Leggett was the assistant coach. We had Coach Jim Schlossnagel there as the volunteer coach. Coach Randy Mazey was there. And then when I committed, Coach Leggett took over my sophomore year, and he had Tim Corbin and John Pulowski, Greg Kilby. I mean, it was the who's who of now. College. Like, they're all highly successful. So each knew their role. Coach Leggett was like the alpha male. He was the voice. Coach Corbin, I always describe, as kind of like the bridge between Coach Leggett and the players. He was like the peacekeeper. And he was the guy that you would go and talk to. And Coach Pulowski was just, he was young in his career and he was intense. But I can tell you, we had absolute battles every practice at Clemson, which made us really, really good. So you had a bunch of alpha male baseball players that were highly successful, a lot of first rounders competing against each other every week in practice. So by the time we got to the weekends, it was like a piece of cake. Like, it was like, I'm facing Chris Benson and Billy Koch and Ken Vining every week in practice. And now I'm facing your pitching staff. Like, you guys are in trouble. So it was really,
that's bonkers.
It is. It was crazy, right? Like, even our guys that went in the 6th and 7th round, like, were amazing arms and pitchers and competitive. And we just really, really worked hard, played hard. And, and again, it was college, so we partied hard.
Oh, really? I never thought about that. Interesting.
Yeah. It was a good team. Yeah. It was a good team. We got after it. So
that's the stories of the coaching tree that have all come, in some way been attached to Coach Leggett. It's like, it's the who's who of college baseball. It really is incredible.
It's even spread. Like, my former teammate David Miller, who's now at Manhattan, in New York, right? He's been a D1 coach for a while, and Mike Hampton,
he coached at my alma mater, William & Mary, for a while.
Yeah, and then you got Mike Hampton, who's now at, he's been at St. John's forever, and then it goes down into high school coaching, and then it goes down into travel. Like, it just spreads like wildfire. It's really crazy.
I think there must be something about, like, it's really a testament to how those guys approached the job. Because if they were sort of going through it like Eeyore from from Winnie the Pooh, right? Like they show up and they're like, there's just no enthusiasm. Then of course they wouldn't excite the people around them and excite their players, because that's part of it. There's a lot of guys like you who are in coaching who played for him, who had a guy who looked like he loved the job, and that's sort of inspirational.
That's coaching and leadership 101 anyway, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the corporate world or in the sports world. Like, you got to have energy as a leader. Like, your team is going to end up taking on your personality. And I've said it 1,000 times to all my youth coaches, and your team will take on the personality and what you're willing to accept and not accept. So if you're a low energy guy and you just kind of go through the motions, like, your team is going to play like that. If you're a high energy kind of get after it type guy, your team is going to take that on and play like that.
Yeah, that's all right, that's the show, guys. That's the show. We're going to hang it up here because it's probably going to be hard to beat that, because that's just a great nugget right there, and it's so true. And you can sort of like think about examples of that in your life,
Absolutely.
Very good, very good. So, so you leave Clemson.
Yep.
I think I'm assuming, I don't have it in front of me. You were a pretty high round draft pick. Played a little pro ball.
Yeah, I was played a couple years in the minors. Was fortunate enough to play a couple years in the big leagues. Back to the minors, traded around, played some winter ball in some foreign countries, and then about year 9, I'd already had a daughter. My son was born, and I was like, I'm done. I'm done with the grind. I'm done with constantly looking over my shoulder, worried about the next prospect coming up, or once you leave kind of your original team, you become expendable. I had some really good years after the Mariner big leagues, thinking, hey, I'm going to get a shot with this squad in the big leagues because I'm putting up some numbers, and nothing really ever came about it. So, just kind of hung them up, walked away from the game. I'll be honest, I walked away a little jaded. And just for really 5 years, never watched it, never talked about it, didn't really do a whole lot with it, and got into my career with Home Depot and became a success in the retail world, and moved up several times. And I got pulled back into baseball because my son started playing t-ball, and
boy,
I was in
Eagle.
I was living in Eagle, Colorado, and the rec league coordinator found out about my background and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coaching your son's team?" And I'm like, "No." And at the time, my wife, who's now my ex-wife, but she was like, "You've got to. There's nobody else that can coach your son or his friends like you can. You gotta do it." And I was like, "All right, let's just see how it goes for one season." And I just fell back in love with the game of baseball.
Incredible. That's wild. A story for another day. But I was offered the coaching job at the middle school in Edwards. About 2 towns over from Eagle. But that's a story for another day. That was a long time ago. So man, I'm glad we got that Colorado connection. So you get pulled in. Your kid's what, 5 at the time, 6, 7 years old at the time?
5 or 6.
Yeah. And you thought you were done. You thought you were done with baseball, and of course you were not. And thankfully so, right?
Right. Yeah. Looking back, it was a good thing.
And eventually, fast forward, and I might be fast forward. And tell me if I'm fast forwarding way too much. But before we hit record, you had said you had listened to one of my previous episodes with an old friend of yours, Chance Beam, who Titans baseball. And so you eventually make your way from Colorado down to, this is the best phrase, I'm pretty sure I want to attribute it to Chance. He called it the Silicon Valley of travel baseball. And ever since I heard that, I was like, oh my God, I love that. So you make it to
he's spot on.
Atlanta, Georgia, the Silicon Valley. It's like, and you make it there early. You make it there. This is like when Silicon Valley is like, we're making Macs and Windows back in the day. You get to Georgia. What time? What year roughly was your landing in Georgia and catching up with Chance?
So I got back in let's see, I'd say probably 2009, 2010. I moved back to my hometown of Marietta, Georgia.
Oh my God, that really is like, that's things are starting to pop off. That's when things are starting to explode.
Yeah. So Gary Baldwin's already got it. He's got East Cobb. He's got he's got all the fields. East Cobb's probably at that point in time got 85 teams throughout all the different age divisions. Gary called me, says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I just moved back to Atlanta. Just took a job with really kind of a sports agent." He's like, "You got a bunch of free time. Listen, I've got a team looking for a coach, paid coach, called the East Cobb Braves. They're 14." And I'm like, "Oh man, okay, sure." It's Gary Baldwin. I played for Gary for 3 years, and I'm like, "Yeah, coach, not a problem. I'll jump in." Did that for a year, and we were supposed to be like, the 5th or 6th best 14-year-old team. We ended up being the 2nd best 14-year-old team at the group. So, Chance was running the East Cobb Titans at that time. He was kind of over that, and the next year he pulled me aside and was like, "Would you be interested in kind of keeping your team together and coming underneath the Titans?" And I was like, "Sure, like, cool, yeah, absolutely." And Chance was great. Like, he taught me some things I really didn't know, about running a team and kind of running a business, and kind of how we're looking at it, how to go through tryouts, and he kind of paved the way for me a little bit on strategy and how I looked at it, and kind of watched him run his practices. And again, high level energy, kind of an alpha guy. It's his way. I was kind of like, yo, this dude's got this thing kind of figured out. And spent a couple years with them, and then ended up ultimately, I moved to Gainesville, Georgia, and started my own program, because I had a bunch of kids coming to East Kyle, and they're driving like an hour and 45 minutes every day for practice, right? And at that time, I was like, nope, practice is mandatory. You can't miss. You won't play. But then I ended up in their neck of the woods and started a small program that ended up getting decent size, a lot of traction. Had an amazing run with 17, 16, and 15-year-old teams that all of our kids signed, and some of them got drafted. Some of them got drafted and ended up playing in the big leagues. And then at the time, my wife basically said, hey, we're moving back to Arizona. I want to be close to my family. And I was like, well, okay. So moved away, again, got back in the corporate world. That kind of disintegrated. The marriage ended up in divorce. And again, like I said, was in corporate, took a job in Alexandria, Virginia. 2 years of that, and I was miserable, and moved down to Bluffton, South Carolina, which is right outside of Hilton Head. They had some baseball teams, some small programs here and there, but the main reason why I started Prime Baseball was my nephews. So I have a 17-year-old nephew, I have a 15-year-old nephew, and I have a 13-year-old nephew, and my sister was running them all over the South, trying to find teams and coaches. And I said, screw this. We're going to make a program just for those age groups. And it kind of really took off from there.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So there's probably a lot of positives and negatives to living in one of the most sought out beach communities in the country. Once you rattle off, a couple of like what the obvious, positives are. What do you love about running the team in Hilton Head?
So we're in Bluffton, right? So I'm 35 minutes across the bridge from Hilton Head. So in Hilton Head, they have their own organization called the Hilton Head Hurricanes. It's small. They don't play on the scale that we do. They play smaller tournaments, and they just kind of stay on the island. I'm in Bluffton. So some of the positives, look, you're 35 minutes from the beach, right? You're 35 minutes away from some great food. So if you feel like you need to take a mini vacation, you just hop over across the bridge, right? We're 30 from where my house is. I'm 35 minutes from Savannah. I'm an hour and 15 minutes away from Charleston. So you've got some historic southern towns. You've got beach one direction. We're 3 hours from Asheville, where we can get to the mountains. So it's kind of like a cool small city. I mean, it's becoming a big city now because all the Northerners are moving down here. But there's pluses and minuses, right? Like we get the heavy weekend traffic where all the out of towners start coming in and jam up all the roads and all the restaurants, and again, tourist attraction. You just kind of live with it. But what I found was there's some really good baseball players out of this area. Like, and I had done my research before I had started anything down here, and just not a ton of kids being seen by colleges or pro scouts and drafted or the ability to play college baseball. And I kind of wanted to help facilitate that with all the connections that I had in those two categories. Like we've got one now named Carmen Majewski, who plays for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So he grew up in Hilton Head, but he had to travel to Atlanta to play and get exposure, and ended up at University of South Carolina. So that's one of the bigger players that's come out of the area. But we've got a lot of good baseball players in our program that, especially in the younger ages, that are the local kids from the Bluffton, Beaufort, Savannah type area that we've got underneath our roof.
You know, like to go back to our brief mention of your time in Colorado. Colorado is like one of my favorite places on earth. But one of the things that they have as an obstacle is, geography.
Yeah.
As far as like they're pretty far from stuff, and while y'all are closer to some baseball hubs, you are kind of out. You're not what I would call centrally located. So I'm kind of like I'm looking at the map right now while we're talking, and I think I mapped it. You're probably 4 to 4.5 hours to Georgia, depending on where you're going in Georgia. Maybe 5 hours to like the backside of Georgia. Augusta's probably 2 hours, maybe. I didn't really chart that one. Charleston has some pretty good baseball. Savannah's the closest if you're looking at the map. So, did I just like in that quick little?
No, you're spot on.
Look at the map. Is that where you're heading to every single weekend? Somewhere between Savannah, Charleston, maybe even up to Columbia, South Carolina, Augusta, and then Atlanta for the bigger ones?
Yeah. So my high school age teams play in Atlanta. They'll play in Jacksonville. They'll play in Orlando. Every blue moon we'll sprinkle in like the Shipyard in Charleston. The youth teams will bounce between Savannah, Jacksonville, Effingham, Georgia. Depending on the talent level on that team, we'll send them to Atlanta every so often. Not necessary, but they'll go to Charleston. So we do have our geographical challenges where, like a ton of the teams in Atlanta, right? They're playing every weekend at home. They don't have to travel anywhere.
Right. And y'all could play every weekend in Atlanta if you chose to.
Correct.
But that's also a 5-hour drive one way each weekend.
It's 5 hours. Then you got, you're spending tens of thousands of dollars for hotel rooms alone.
Right.
Where an Atlanta team may pay $3,300 to play in an organization, but yet that's all they pay.
Yeah, there's no hotels and no food
every night. Yeah.
So mixing in a weekend in Savannah and a weekend in Charleston is, it's good baseball, but it also, maybe more importantly, it saves on the budget a little bit.
Yeah, like I'll be honest with you. I've got a mixed team that I coach, the 25 class and the 26 class, 16, 17. Like we won't play in Charleston and we won't play down in Savannah. Our team's farther along than that, right? We go to Atlanta, where my 16-year-olds are playing up in the 17-year-old division and winning tournaments, and there's some talent. There's a lot of. Currently, we have 7 D1 kids committed on that squad. By the end of the summer, we'll probably have 18 off of that group.
Holy cow! Pretty good team out of small town USA.
Yeah. So I pull from with that team, right? So it's Bluffton, and then there's a town called Douglas, Georgia, 3 hours away. It's got a small Tipton, Georgia. So I've got some small town southern Georgia kids on that squad that we've ended up getting the best player out of that town on this team. And it's been a blessing. It's just great kids, great families. We've made it kind of feel like a family, and everybody we just had a player sign yesterday with Kennesaw State, and all of his teammates were the first ones on social media, like congratulating them, thanking them, like you're awesome, no jealousy. It's really, really cool to kind of sit back and see, especially in today's time.
Yeah, that is nice. Dig that. Yeah, my initial thought was like Hilton Head. You're in the South. This must be like all roses and just all easy, right? But then you're like, not. It's like it
not at all.
Bluffton. There's some. Yeah. You got to get in the car and head to play. Hey, maybe here's an idea for you. I think Atlanta is the worst place on earth to vacation during the summer. I think it's terrible. I would, if I'm a parent, I got to burn my week of vacation during the summer to go to Atlanta. I would be so mad. All right, hear me out on this. You host a summer tournament in Hilton Head. Boom.
Yeah, I've tried it.
You're a millionaire just like that.
Obstacles.
Yeah, no kidding. Like rooms. Like where's everybody go sleep?
Well, we've got, we've got hotels to do it, but the people that own the fields, like the school systems down here, charge you an arm and a leg to rent their baseball fields, right? And then you've got the rec departments want no part of it. Like they're not interested because they're making all their money off the tourism tax dollars. Mm-hmm. They don't need to host any of that.
Of course.
So it's challenging, right? I've talked to Perfect Game and I've talked to PBR, and I said, man, but Perfect Game had a tournament in Savannah, and Tony, who's in charge of that, Tony Von Doltron, it just run into so many challenges with so many fields. It's just like really, really hard to do. It's a great idea. They would make a killing at it. Come down, spend a week at Hilton Head, have a big tournament. But it's so congested because there's only one way on the island, one way off
in, one way
you're
out.
You're going to have your normal tourists. Yeah. You're going to have your normal tourists, and then you're going to put baseball on top of that. People are like, nope, no thank you.
Yeah.
So
it's
definitely, look, the area is beautiful, but it's challenging, right? Small town politics come into it. This is not being, again, arrogant by any means, but we do have the best travel baseball program in the area, like hands down. Like we have the best players at the age groups in our area, and there's some resentment. There's some resentment with me because I'm just black and white. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but it's small town USA. There's definitely some challenges, right? Like, hey, we don't want to go to this tournament because we want to go surf this weekend. Like what? Like
that is awesome.
My boys aren't dealing with that up in Atlanta, right? But like, so we got to go surf. Like, oh, okay, crazy,
unbelievable,
look, man. Amazing golf, right? You got so many amazing golf courses down here. So you take the good with the bad.
Yeah, no kidding. I have not heard of a lot of ball players skipping events due to chasing the swell.
So wakeboarding, right? Like there's wakeboard competitions now that these kids have gotten into. Like, I've never heard of it, but all of a sudden being down here, it's like, we got a wakeboard competition. And I'm like, what? That's a thing? And they're like,
that's hilarious.
Like, holy hell.
Well, longtime listeners of this pod will probably have heard me say, if anybody is complaining about travel baseball being expensive, just be happy your kid doesn't wakeboard, because you got to go buy $100,000 boat so that they can compete and get and practice, right? Like, yeah, sure. Like baseball's expensive, but compared to what?
So,
right?
When what I always hear, and listen, I'll be the first to tell you, some of these travel programs out here, price gauge, they're gouging the crap out of everything, right? Like there's no names, but there are. I mean, it's just in everything. But like, I tell some parents, like, you have a daughter, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, she's a cheerleader and softball player? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're spending 3 times more money on her than you are on your son with our dudes. Mm-hmm. And they're like, huh? I'm like, I'm a dad of a cheerleader that did the travel cheerleading. My daughter's a national champion. She graduated college, but she won 3 national championships. I know what it costs to cheer. And, like, you have no problem dropping that. So why would you have a problem? And again, you have to take it in context, right? There are some organizations that just raise the prices and price gouge. Right? I mean, it is like every business. But, there are a lot of programs that just do it the right way. And, the dues aren't astronomical. But, I mean, people need to understand, like, as a program, you're paying for expensive tournaments now. So you've got to make sure, like, you've got the team to go and compete to get your money's worth, because if you don't have a good team, you're playing 3 games, and it may cost you $3,000. Well, you could play 4 tournaments for that money and play more games with that money than going up to a PG or a PBR and getting hammered. But, like, people don't see it that way. Oh, no, we got to go with the big boys. Well, the big boys go to the tournaments because they're big boys. They've got the horses to go play 7 to 10 games. You do not. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, what I hate to see is when parents who aren't, neck deep in this thing are dictating to the coaching staff where they must go, right?
Yes.
When the coach knows full well that taking that roster to Atlanta is a waste of time, but the parents go, well, if we don't go to Atlanta, if you're not going to Atlanta, we're not going to play for you. And I'm like, they're blackmailing you, man. They're blackmailing you because they think this is Cooperstown. They don't understand. And I say that a lot. It's like Atlanta is the Cooperstown of the older age groups. And mom and dad have grown up hearing about it, and they feel like if they don't go, they have missed something, even though it might not be a net positive for their kid or their team. So
it's keeping up with the Joneses, right? It's like,
correct.
So it's the social media, like it's so they could put on social media, hey, playing at PBR, hey, we're playing at PG, like. Okay, well, post it, but then what did your team and your son do? Oh, they went 0-4 and got blasted.
Correct.
And didn't play more than 10 innings. Like, how much fun is that?
Or they can tell, or it's for their office mate back at work who doesn't care. Who doesn't care. Like, what are we really doing? What are we really doing this for? And I'll be honest with you, I'm really, really proud. My partner and I that run Prime, we'll walk away from those parents. We will walk away from those kids. Like, we don't get dictated to. We're the ones that are telling everybody, these are the tournaments that we're playing in. There's a mix of travel. There's a mix of local. Once you get to 13, and if you have a team that's really good, like we do right now, our 13-year-olds are phenomenal. Well, they're going to go play in the big boy tournaments. Our 14-year-old team is okay. They're not great. Well, they went to PBR. We got smashed. We went 1-3, and we came back and played some more local tournaments and had some success. But I explained to him, this is where our roster currently sits. This is the level that we need to be playing so that our kids get 4 to 5 games a weekend so that it's making it worthwhile. Yeah.
The other myth is, oh, my son's not getting any reps in the game. You don't get reps in the game. You get reps in the practices that you're not showing up to.
Whoops.
Mike, here's a newsflash. Your son plays shortstop. He may get 4 ground balls all weekend long. Is that really reps? Or does he get 100 reps at our practices off our machines? And they're like, oh, yes. Like, he may get walked 6 times this weekend. Is he really getting reps? I mean, they just, it's just kind of a massive disconnect.
Yeah, no doubt.
These player rankings and team rankings, it's all BS, bro. It's BS. Like, I'll be the first. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I don't know the other guys, maybe, but I'm gonna tell you, I'm black and white. The player rankings are BS. It's a money grab. It's a money grab. Hey, I got the ranking. My first showcase was a 6.5. Okay, guarantee you go back the next time you're a 7.5 because everybody's trying to get that number, the 9 number, right? But if you look down on the breakdown, if you're 9 and above, you're supposed to be in the big leagues.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But if
you go to 10 events, you're going to get that 9, right?
There it is. I mean? Bingo. And if your team's playing enough events, you're eventually going to get ranked.
I think that those rankings are maybe 99% targeted to mom and dad.
100% ego-driven. 100% ego-driven.
I would go so far as to say, if you're in the pick a percent, let's say top 10%, if you're in the top 10%, do you think college coaches need some third-party ranking to know that kid's good? Probably not.
Not at all.
I think they're
Zero.
savvy enough at their job of assessing talent to look at a kid and be like, yeah, kid's pretty good.
College coaches know what they need in their program. College coaches know what's going to work for them and the style of play that they have. It's not for everybody. But I'm going to tell you right now, my 2024 class, every one of those kids, all 17 of my kids have signed. Not one of them had a ranking. Not one.
Have you ever heard of a situation where a coach is on the bubble on a kid, like, yeah, I think he's okay. Let me look him up. Oh my God, he's ranked high. Yeah, I like him. Yeah, of course.
No, I've never heard that.
It doesn't happen. So then here's the flip side. if you're not highly ranked, the ranking doesn't help you. And so I think there's an argument to be made that like all the rankings are bunk because it's like
they are. I mean, listen,
the good kids don't need it, and the bad kids shouldn't. They shouldn't like they don't want it. Like they shouldn't want it.
Again, it goes back to a money grab. So as a parent, why are you going to a PG showcase when your kid can barely get on the field with his travel team and start? Why are you going? You're crushing, like there's no shot here. You know, like my nephew signed the other day. He's going to Clemson, Power 5 school. He's going as a catcher. He is the best catcher in the 24 class in the state of South Carolina. There's no argument with it. Never ranked. I had a great relationship with the coaching staff at Clemson. Sent them the schedule, said, hey, this is when Steele's going to be catching. Coach Backett showed up to 2 games. Steele didn't hit great those games. He caught great. He was on the bump and threw great, but he competed his ever-living ass off. And Eric was like, Coach Backett was like, got to have him. That's exactly what I want in my program.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a discussion of, oh, what's his PG ranking? And look, like PG's offering a service. I'm not knocking PG. Like they've got it figured out, man. Like they've grown into a monster. Like they're huge. But what we're doing is now allowing the below average and mediocre player to think they have a shot.
And for much longer than because eventually they're going to figure it out, right? So this keeps them in the kind of in the dark for way too long. In my opinion,
like think about it, like rec league, right? Rec league baseball, youth Dixie and Little League is falling to the wayside because every Tom, Dick, and Harry starts a travel team. Every dad gets mad, starts a travel team, and all of a sudden we start going up. And you know, you got some mediocre players that on a team with like 3 or 4 that carry that team, and everybody thinks they're going to get a scholarship. That's just not the case. Factual numbers, say to you 3 to 4% of all the baseball players in the world are going to get college scholarships, and all of those 4% that go to college, 1% get drafted. The numbers are staggering.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've said is, hey, your kid is mediocre. It's okay. We have a team for him. Everybody's going to get a medal. Pay your money. It's kind of disgusting, to be honest with you. And I think one of your questions, right? Like you texted me a few days ago.
Yeah.
If I was telling somebody, you know what I'd really love to see in travel baseball would go back to is having qualifying events. Teams have to go and finish in the top 4 to get into the big events again. Because the WWBA used to be the top 30 to 40 teams. You would have to battle all summer long to get your invite or to win some tournaments to get that invite to be in with the big boy, the East Cobb Astros and the
totally.
At the time, it was the Doolin Dodgers were huge, right? Like they were dominant. Or Orlando Scorpions.
You mentioned earlier playing for Gary Baldwin back in the day. You played for him for 3 years. I'm gonna make a guess. Was that under what we used to call AAU baseball?
So it was Pony. We did Pony and Babe Ruth and Colt. So we had a 13-year-old regular season. You played 10 games. You would make an all-star team. Essentially, it would be your travel team.
Okay.
Gary would then say, "All right, we're going to Knoxville. We're going to Paducah, Kentucky, and we're gonna go to Jacksonville, Florida, to play 3 tournaments."
Okay.
Then we'd come home and we would start the Babe Ruth state championship, regional championship, then the World Series if you got that far.
So the reason I was asking about that is because what you just mentioned about the qualifier, we did that with our AAU was sort of the governing body that we were playing under.
Yep.
and we had one team in Virginia the first year. Okay, one. And then, so we went and represented the state of Virginia at that national tournament. That national tournament wasn't that many teams. It was like maybe I don't remember, like 30, maybe something like that. And then the second year we had to do a qualifier here in the state. The winner of the qualifier went on to the national tournament, the AAU national tournament. That qualifier, I think it was a 3-team tournament. Okay, so we won that, went to the national tournament. And then again that third year, I did think we did that 3 years in a row, 12, 13, and 14 years old. But the idea of that qualifier, such a great idea, because it makes you earn it, and then you don't end up with 400 teams at the big event.
Yeah. Well,
that's right, the problem. We talk about this ad nauseum on this podcast. Every week I talk about this, and I'm like,
gross.
let's shrink it down and make it super like competitive, where we have evenly matched teams playing against each other.
Listen, I'll be honest with you. The only way that would ever happen is if the big dogs, the Canes, 5-Star, Wow Factor now has a bunch of teams, the Astros, whatever. We can go down the list of the big dogs, right? If they say enough's enough, we're not playing in these, we're going to start our own tournament faction. And, we're going to invite. So you may have 10 really dominant programs throughout the country. But now, NorCal baseball in North California has been dominant for years. Why are they going to come all the way across the country if they can stay in Arizona or California and play great teams too? You kind of lose that. But the bigger teams say, all right, you know what, we really like. For example, all right, Prime with Shane has got 3 really good teams at the older age groups. We're going to invite him to play in this huge tournament, and there's only going to be 10 teams. I'm in. I want to go do that. I want to go battle. I want to go play 4 games of really good teams. We may lose, but I want my guys to play that. I don't want the WWBA. Last summer they had 400 teams in the 17-year-old age group and 400 teams in the 16-year-old age group. My parents, between the 2 teams, I traveled 1,200 miles as a coach because I wasn't at East Cobb where they're hosting it. I drove all over Georgia so that my 2 age groups could play their 5 games, 6 games. And I'm like, 400 teams, they made $1.5 million. Now, they didn't make that, right? That's what they collected in fees. You got to pay the umpires, you got to pay the schools. But, bro, that's a lot of money. Again, man, I talk about this every single week. It's if you want your 400 teams, do it. But let's turn it into 4 separate events with 100 teams. Can we start there? So you have or how about this? Let's have a qualifier.
I think that's the best idea.
How about this? In the WWBA, we're going to do a Mid-Atlantic qualifier. So Virginia, some states up in that area, maybe Kentucky, whoever, right in that Mid-Atlantic, whoever's Maryland, Virginia. Okay, the top 4 teams in that final group get an automatic bid. We're going to do the South: Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee. Okay, maybe you expand it to 6 teams because you're pulling more states. The top 6 teams get a bid, right? All of a sudden now, you got 30 teams in a tournament that are legit.
Yep.
That have either won or finished in the top 4 or 5 of their group out of so many that
problem
that
is
bid. Now you're not getting, but the problem is it's money, man. It's just,
well, I was going to say, that you just cut $1 zillion out of their bottom line. And what I mentioned earlier is a lot of the parents are going to be ticked too, because this is, again, it's the Cooperstown and the older age group. So you just have to bracket it better, and you say, hey, we're still going to bring the 400 teams here each week, but let's turn it into several different tournaments, and there'll be some blowback at first. But if you've got a D-level team, let's play you against D-level teams instead of an A-level team.
Is everybody really meant, and this is going to be controversial, but is everybody really meant to play travel ball? Are we really?
Yeah.
Is there really that many good baseball players in the United States of America that really should be playing elite travel baseball?
It is.
Nope.
This is driven by the parents, but when I hear the parent, of my 7-year-old's classmate who's playing quote unquote travel baseball, it's just like let's call it what it is. Travel baseball is just the new little league. It's the new Babe Ruth.
Bingo.
And so maybe a bunch of these folks, should revert back to that. And guess what? Now you won't complain so much about the price tag because it's going to cost you $200 for the year.
I would love for the rec leagues throughout the United States to be packed.
Right. Thriving.
Like booming at the seams, thriving, taking those kids that are not ready yet, that can get a couple more years of development or repetition. And then when they're truly ready, maybe at 13 or after puberty, like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
But it's keeping up with the Joneses, man. It's
all right.
It's
so
every weekend.
So here's an opportunity for me to challenge you. What we've been doing basically is you and I have been discussing one of the questions off of my standard list, and we've been breaking down some of the ways that maybe we can improve travel baseball. And you've just given a really good idea. And so when presented the opportunity, I like to turn that around and say, hey, that idea you just came up with, you can do that. Do that in your local area. Do that in Bluffton and Hilton Head, and see if you can't make that the number one little league between 6 years old and 11 years old, the number one little league in the country. Like, you could do that.
So if I told you they have 600 kids that sign up for Little League in Bluffton, the Little League here is thriving. It's thriving.
Awesome.
They don't have enough coaches. We do free coaching clinics for them. We do free evaluations for the Little League so that we make sure that the teams I wouldn't say are fair, but that one team's not stacked. We evaluate and then they make their teams. But like last year in the Little League alone, I believe they had 600 kids sign up for it.
That's good. That's good news. That's really good news.
Yeah. So it's and again, we have a 9-year-old. We started 9 years old. My partner Joe is jonesing me for an 8-year-old squad just because we get kids in the program a little earlier. And I'm like, but if we do, it's only 4. Listen, it's 4 tournaments. They play all local, and they've got to play in their rec league. Like, they got to be able to make that all-star team and to be able to have that all-star team. You know what I mean? They got to be able to witness and earn that, I guess. So. That's
cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about your partner a little bit.
Yeah. So Joe's got a long history of coaching in college. He's coached in small schools. Coached at Pitt. He coached at East Carolina. He did their their club teams. Right, so he was part of the program, but he was the head coach of the club teams. Had come down, he moved down to Savannah and was with another program called The Chain. Their team started kind of falling apart, falling off and falling apart. And he called me and said, "Hey, look, I really want to get with someone that takes this really, really serious. Would you be willing to sit down and talk?" And at that time, I had just taken a high school job as a varsity head coach, and Prime was thriving, and I didn't want it to fall by the wayside. So we sat down and came to some terms, and he's our youth director. So he's in charge of teams 12 all the way down, and I'm in charge of the 13 and all the way up. And just a great baseball guy, really, really dedicated to the sport, really, really dedicated to the kids. He runs our arm care program. He's just big on educating and developing as much as he can. So he's been a nice shot of adrenaline in the program over the last year. So love having him around.
That's cool. And is he sort of based more in the Savannah area, or is he closer into you?
Oh no, he lives 5 minutes away from me here in Bluffton.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier. you were talking earlier about some guys, some players who are coming from pretty far away. How did
Yep.
how'd you the Prime strike me as a pretty locally based organization, but then you get a couple random guys from 3 hours away. How's that happen?
Playing in Jacksonville, Florida.
Ah,
Look across the field, and I see a guy that I grew up with playing in high school and in college named Cy Jones, head varsity baseball coach of Coffee County. I yell out Cy. He turns around. He comes over and gives me a big old hug, introduces me to his 14-year-old son, finds out that I run a program and I've got a team. 3 days later, he calls me and says, "Hey, man, we're going to be looking for a change. I can bring you like 5 or 6 really good players. They all play on his high school team.
gotcha.
They come over with me. I develop them the next 3 years, but then all of a sudden, their younger brothers or their younger guys that know them,
Yeah.
all of a sudden are like, dude, he's gotten into a really good baseball player because we are different. We practice. So our program's different from a lot of the big boys. We practice as a team. So we take weekends where we practice 3 hours a day, get 6 hours of practice in, and it's just not individual flying in. And like, that's what we're trying to do, is still do that. And he loved it. And it's just grown from there. So from Coffee County, it's gotten into Tips High School and Lowndes County, Georgia, which is a huge powerhouse program. And, they just, with me calling schools on these kids' behalves or sending video or helping these kids any way I can, people are like, man, you have an advocate in their corner for them that can pick up the phone and call a lot of the schools. And, sometimes I love it because the college coaches are brutally honest with me and we have great relationships, and they're like, yeah, man, just not a dude for us. Okay, cool. Thank you. Check it off. I move to the next school and I send them, and then some schools are like, yeah, this is our guy. I love it. So,
yeah. So the long story short is, like, one of your friends, one of your old friends,
yeah,
you connect with him, and then that opens up that pond that you start fishing in.
100%.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. You see that at the college level too. You see one good player come from an area or from a school, and then all of a sudden, every good player behind them ends up at that same place.
Well, that's Coach Leggett ended up getting Chris Benson because of me. Chris Benson and I played summer baseball together, and he was my roommate. And I said, Coach Leggett, you know about Chris Benson? He was like, yeah, I've heard him. He's okay. And I was like, no, he's not. He's the best pitcher in the state of Georgia right now. He is dominant. And he was like, oh, I need to go back in. And we ended up getting Chris Benson at Clemson from Georgia because I kept hounding Coach Leggett and like, go get him.
That's awesome.
Go get him.
That's awesome. Well, listen, man, I'm looking at the clock. I know I've got another call I've got to get to in a few minutes. So I want to make sure that we leave enough time for you to just, anything that we need to cover that you wish we had covered. We can get to that now. Is there anything you feel like you want people to know about yourself or about Prime that I didn't ask about?
Look, we're not we've got 10, 11 teams, right? That's it. We're not huge. We don't have 300 to 1,000 teams. Our youth program is locally based. It's intense. It's a lot of development. It's a lot of sacrifice. Parents have to be bought in. Our high school age teams are really, really good. We got some really good baseball players that are the same way, that are high level, want to play in college baseball. And I just feel like, and I think everybody you've talked to feels like they do it right in some way, shape, or form. But ours is just really like a family atmosphere. I know every kid's name in our program. I know all their parents' names. I really try to make it a point of learning what makes them tick and how to manage them, because you can't manage kids all the same way, right? But yeah, that's it. I think we've covered a lot. As you do, I think you do a great job. Obviously, listening to some of these podcasts, you've got a lot of high level guys that have had a lot of success, and it's exciting to be on here.
Well, I appreciate you doing that for me today and with me. And next time I'm in Hilton Head, and it's been a long time since I've been to Hilton Head, but next time I'm there, I'll have to catch up with you and come watch a ball game, or maybe go watch a surfing competition, depending on where your kids are that weekend.
That's right, or a fishing competition for sure.
I do remember those boats in the marina there.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm sure some of your kids hop on some of those big boats and head out and catch some big fish. Well, listen, thank you for coming on. I want you to hang on one more second. I'm gonna stop the recording, but don't hang up.